Now let's go ahead and set up a Splunk instance and put the add-on and app for AWS on it. And the easiest way to do that is to go to your AWS console, and from there you're going to want to go to AWS Marketplace, click on the Learn More here, open in a new tab, and then search for Splunk, and then you'll have a few options that appear. Splunk Enterprise is what we're going to do, where you basically stand up your own Splunk instance in your managed AWS environment. There's also a similar one for Splunk Insights for AWS Cloud Monitoring. This is different in that it allows you to only configure AWS inputs, nothing else. It's for purely only AWS monitoring. Then there's also a Splunk Cloud ability to sign up here, but I believe this is also limited to lower volume. So we're going to do Splunk Enterprise. And we're going to click here, go to our own region, US West Oregon, continue. And then next screen, we'll want to validate some of these settings. In my case here regarding EC2 instance type, for testing purposes, I like the M4 large because it's a balance of cost and decent memory and CPU footprint. Then we got to also assign this into a particular VPC and subnet. Security group, we have to either create a new group based on these settings here or update an existing security group to at least have port 22 and 8000 here at the least open. And then key pair so you can SSH to that EC2 instance down the road. And then once you're ready there, you can just click with one launch. One other thing we will have to update later on though is once this is provisioned, it only has 8 gigabytes of EBS storage. So it doesn't state that here, but there's only 8 gigabytes of EBS storage. We need to increase that to something like 50 or 100, maybe more, if this is going to be an actual Splunk server with indexes. At this point, the AMI is up. We validated that we can access it, and here it is with a running state. However, we really need to increase the EBS storage because it's only at 8 gigabytes. And once there's less than 5 gigabytes available, Splunk basically will be at a standstill. There needs to be, by default, at least 5 gigabytes of space available in where Splunk is installed. So let's go and update this. First, we need to ideally stop Splunk. So we're going to go to our instance over here. And once we're in here, we're going to stop Splunk with opt Splunk bin Splunk stop. And here I sudoed in as the Splunk user. And then once Splunk is stopped, we'll be at a good spot where we can now come in back into the EC2 console and go to Actions, Instance State, Stop. And once this stops, we'll now be able to update the EBS settings. We'll basically go down to over here and find root device devxvda and click on this EBS ID. That'll bring it up in another tab over here. At this point, we can go, the instance is stopped. We go to Actions with this selected, and we go to Modify Volume, and now we'll change this to 108. Yes, and at this point, we can go back to EC2 dashboard, instances, and here is the AMI. We can now restart this. Also, don't forget that when you restart the image, it's going to have a different IP address most likely, unless you assigned a elastic IP to it. And so in this case, we got to copy this new address and put it in our URL here to connect to Splunk. So there we go. This is the same instance, just a different IP. And here's what happens if you do not update your EBS volume to be greater than 8 gigabytes, which comes installed out of the box with the AMI. Here is the running instance of the AMI, and if I go here to messages, I have the minimum free disk space has been reached, and I look at this health dashboard, could not create search because it can't access the indexes, and the system's basically at a standstill. So this is why you need to immediately update the EBS volume to 50 gigabytes at the least upon installation. So now let's go ahead and launch into Splunk. So here's my instance. So I need to go to this IP address over here, :8000. And first time logging in, so admin is the user, and then the password is the EC2 instance ID. So back to here again, get that EC2 instance ID, which is this guy. And Control V, sign in. And now I have to change my password. Okay, so now that I'm done with that, that will now take me to the Splunk homepage, and I can now install the AWS app and AWS add-on. So to do that, we'll just go up here to our little icon, little gear icon. We can either click Browse More or Install App from File if we downloaded it. Let's click Browse More Apps. Let's now search for AWS. There's a Splunk app for AWS. We're going to install that. And we're going to put in our information, our Splunk ID. Okay, we're going to choose to restart later. Let's finish adding these other apps first. Restart later. We've done the Splunk app. Now we want the add-on. So Splunk add-on for AWS. Same credentials. And similarly, restart later. And then now let's also search for Python. And we should see here Python for scientific computing. We want the for Linux 64-bit version. Install that. And once this is installed, we'll be able to restart the Splunk environment. So now restart now. And there we go. Now next we should have the Splunk environment up and running and ready for us to configure.